Hi everybody, my name is Kevin Gantos. I'll be the instructor for this web server application development course. Based on the roster, some of you I've had previously in contemporary programming, some of you are new faces. So welcome everybody. I hope this is going to be a great class. We're going to cover a lot of really interesting stuff, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. This week is kind of going to be a kickoff week, obviously, because it's week one. We're just going to talk about the logistics of the course, what my expectations are from you, what your expectations should be from myself and from the course, and then just do a brief overview of the content that we're going to be covering for the rest of the term. I guess to start off with, I should probably make this as a disclaimer. This course has a prerequisite, which is contemporary programming. The contemporary programming course, you should have learned the Microsoft .NET framework and C Sharp. This course focuses on using ASP.NET MVC version 4 as well as C Sharp. So the your competency in C Sharp is kind of expected coming into this course. I'm not going to be covering the C Sharp language in a whole lot of detail, just more as a refresher, but we will be using it extensively. It will be the programming language that we use throughout a majority of this course. So the first thing I kind of just wanted to kick through is the syllabus for this course. All the materials I'm going to present in this video are available on Blackboard as independent, but I just wanted to make them available to you through this and let me kind of go through and explain some of the details. I won't take a lot of time reading the syllabus, but I do want to make just kind of hit some high points and make sure that everything is explained verbally to you, but you can go through and read the entire syllabus on your own. So in the syllabus, I have basically my contact information, my UC email address, as well as my Google Voice number, the 685-0634, as well as my Skype and Google Hangouts. So since this is an online-only course, I expect that there will be needs for communication, so I want to make myself as available as possible. The textbook for this class is the ASP.NET MVC4 Pro book. It's by Apress. This book is available through the Safari Books Online, so if you have access to that, and I'll actually put a link in the Blackboard course for Safari Books, so then you can actually go out and view that book electronically instead of ordering it or having to go down to UC and actually pick up the book. The book reads very well online as well as print. As this book will be used primarily as kind of a reference point or a secondary perspective to the lectures and to the content. The book, while it is part of this course, I will not be teaching directly from the book. I'll be using it, like I said, kind of as an anchor point for the topics and concepts that we'll cover. I may deviate a little bit from some of the content in the book, and the reason for that is that this field of using ASP.NET, MVC, the web server app development, is my full-time job. It's what I do full-time, so I'm very familiar with this space and with the development space of doing web development with ASP.NET. So I'm going to be kind of reaching from my experience and helping show you and explain to you, why you should do things a certain way, why one way is potentially better than another, and try to give you real-world perspective around what we're going to be learning. In my opinion, quite often in a book, you get kind of one perspective, which is the author's perspective. They're trying to keep things as concise and consistent as possible because you're just learning. And honestly, quite often they end up taking kind of the more simplistic approach, which works perfectly fine for small application development, but when you're trying to do large development scenarios, you end up finding yourself, the term I like to use is coding yourself into a corner very quickly. And because of that, there are things that I have learned over the years that just help kind of keep yourself from getting yourself coded into a corner, keeps you from getting into these complex scenarios where you try your best to get yourself out of, and sometimes it's just not feasible unless you take certain approaches. So those are the kinds of things that I'll be bringing to the course above and beyond what's available in the textbook. So if at any point you feel like I'm kind of going off tangent from what you've read or what you've heard previously, please feel free to ask me. I know this is very much an asynchronous course where I'll be posting these videos primarily, and then you'll be probably responding back to me via email. But again, the Skype and the Google Hangouts, those are platforms that I want to engage with and I want to start to use with this class so that we can actually be more synchronous. We can actually have conversations. I want to get to know you and just make sure that we're having clear communication about this, because programming is a difficult concept, and often trying to write out what you're doing versus seeing it and sharing it can make it quite difficult. Okay, so in terms of the objectives, we're going to be doing server-side web development, implementing page rendering, setting up layouts for the web application, doing data binding, deploying the apps, and then implementing page objects, or what are called view models. And then the last thing that I really want to hit this term is the development of web services. So those are the 7 kind of fundamental pieces of what this course is going to cover. There's more detail in there than that, but those are the kind of the highlights. Class guidelines. Since this is an online course, Blackboard is the primary communication vehicle. I'll work to incorporate discussion boards and other elements so that we can have good conversations, good Q&A. All the grading and everything, all the assignment submissions will be electronic. All the grading will be done via Blackboard. So all of that will be there as well. If you have any sort of disability services, please make me aware of those as soon as possible. And before I forget, then there are a lot of assistance services for students. The labs specifically often have programming help, and I am obviously available as well to assist as much as I possibly can. So please utilize me if you have questions. Please utilize those resources as well. This course, I'm taking a slightly different approach than what other professors may have in the past. What I'd like to do, and I'll talk about this as we kind of get past the syllabus a little bit, is I want you to start to think about, what are we doing in this class? We're going to be building web applications. So they're not just websites where you'd be building, some HTML pages, some JavaScript, some style sheets. We're actually going to be taking this a step further, and we're going to begin building smart, robust web applications. We're going to take the concepts that you've learned in contemporary programming with building Windows applications and translate that to the web. We want to build apps that are Facebook-esque. We want to build apps that are like Twitter. We want to be able to build apps like Amazon. We want to be able to do these types of things that are not just basic web pages being served up, but they're very sophisticated systems that require authentication, user management, inventory, database connectivity, web services for passing and sharing data. All of these things that really take a website outside of its box of static HTML, images, images, style sheets, and JavaScript. So with trying to accomplish all of that, there is a level of sophistication that goes into this and a level of complicated programming. That being said, my objective for you is to actually think about, what is a situation, what is a program that you would like to write? And in writing that program, what would you like to accomplish? So another way maybe to think of this is think about right now. You're going to be learning about these tools. You're going to be able to build these web applications. If someone came to you today and said, I want you to build me a web app, or I want this web app built, or what web application would you build? What would you build? Would you build something that's like a Facebook? Would you build something that's like an Instagram? Would you build something that is e-commerce, like Amazon or Zappos or any of those types of sites? Would you build something to that extent? Or would you go completely out of left field and build something like a Google Docs? So think about that idea, and I want you to kind of roll that around and consider options and avenues. What's something that would really interest you personally? Because that's going to be the anchor point for all of the work that you'll be doing weekly, midterms, and finals will be that anchor point concept or that kind of mini senior design project. Okay? So the way that this will work is that we'll have weekly assignments, and those weekly assignments will basically be, here's what you learned, here's what the lecture was, and then I want you to take that and I want you to apply it to that mini senior design project idea that you came up with. By doing that, I want you to be able to take what you're learning and apply it in something that you have an interest in, that you have a passion in. Quite often I tell people, they say, well, I struggle with programming, I'm not very good at it, it just doesn't always click with me. The one piece of advice I always give people is the more you do it, even if you're doing a terrible, not a terrible job at it, but if you're doing a poor job at it, you're struggling with it, you're really trying to figure out what to do with it, practice. It's like riding a bike. You may not be very good at it. You may not be able to get things to compile. You don't understand the errors. You kind of get down this road and you get completely lost. You don't know what to do. The best thing that you can do in that case is take what you're working on and just keep hammering at it and hammering at it. Sometimes I run into this situation where I'll be building something and I get so frustrated because it doesn't work and I can't figure it out. And I'll even get to the point where I say, okay, fine. I'll just throw it away. I'll start over, build something again from scratch, and then just that forcing myself to start over and think back through the pain and the trouble and the lessons that I've learned, I end up often finding out, oh, that was the piece I missed. Oh, that's the thing that I didn't do last time. Or, oh, this is what I did last time. Let me try a different approach. Another thing that's always good is Google. Google is your friend. The best thing you can do is when you run into a problem is Google it. Google the heck out of it. Try to find people that have run into these same problems, that have either asked the same questions, asked similar questions, and by going through that process, you'll begin to learn what I kind of call the subculture of programming. Every program, every programming language, every programming technology has its own subculture, its own terminology, its own way of approaching things. And as you Google things and try to learn about ASP.NET MVC or the Entity Framework or C# or anything like that, SQL Server, you'll begin to grasp the subculture of that technology. And you may ask the question the first time and get answers that completely don't make any sense to you. You don't understand what they're talking about, and obviously you're not getting the answer that you're expecting. But by continuing to ask those questions, by continuing to Google search, you'll begin to build for yourself that terminology that's used. And you'll begin to be able to look at, okay, people are asking about this thing. You can go off on a tangent or a rabbit trail and search, what is this thing that people keep asking about? And then you can go back and go, oh, that's the kind of thing I'm trying to accomplish. Now, let me take the terminology that I've just learned and re-ask my question in a different way, and you'll be amazed at the things that you'll be able to pick up and learn, because you're using the terminology that subculture uses, as well as you're getting a grasp of how these technologies are designed, how these technologies are developed. And then you can do a much better job of applying those technologies when you get into the scenario of working on your application. So it's such a great thing to, run into barriers, run into roadblocks, but it is so very time consuming. There have been moments where I as a professional, working on building production applications for an organization, I will burn 3-5 days learning a technology and learning the subculture of that technology, just to be sure that I have a good enough understanding to move forward and begin development using that technology effectively. Specific example is the Entity Framework. That was something that I recently kind of nosedived into for a project that I'm working on, and it literally took me a week of watching videos, reading sample code, Google searching the heck out of things to try to understand how to use the Entity Framework effectively. and doing it in a way that isn't just the by the book, this is how you do it, but really getting under the hood and trying to build applications and using the Entity Framework to its fullest capacity. So don't feel like because you're struggling with something in this class, don't feel like that's your stop point, that's your barrier. Really think of that as this is a great opportunity to learn something, and yes, it's going to take some effort, it's going to take some work and probably a little bit of time, but putting in that time and effort, especially if your major is software development, that's the nature of the business. That's just the way it works. I don't say that to discourage you, but I say that to say don't feel discouraged when you struggle, because that is the best thing that you can do. Okay, so those are the weeklies. Your midterms and exams will basically consist of the use of that project concept and applying that and making that your final exam. So your final exam will basically be a a fully working application that utilizes all the technologies and all the approaches that we've discussed throughout the term. So the ability to connect to a database, creating controllers, creating actions, creating view models, creating views, being able to pass data from, pull data from a database, handle it within a controller, load it into a model or a class, and then pass that off to the view, and then have the view render out on the screen, and then respond to certain click actions or certain other things, and make it so that it's a real working application. It has authentication. It uses web services. All of these different things that we're going to cover, I want to see all of that in your final project. So as we go through, and I'll have some additional worksheets for you to work through, but I want you to begin again to think about what would that final project be? What is something I can really invest myself into? That will then be your final. So as we go through this and as we work through this, I want that to really be your focus. This isn't something where it's going to be a 1 week thing. I mean, we're going to take the whole term, the whole 16 weeks or so, and we're going to jump into this and make this part of our everyday. Ideally, I would recommend that you should be at least coding for 1 hour every day. More idealistic is you would be coding for 1 hour every day for this class, and if you're a software development major, you'll probably be coding for more classes than just this one class. So make sure that you're in there and you're coding. That may seem like overkill, it may seem like it takes up your entire life. Well, as a professional, I sit and I code for 8 hours a day, maybe 6 hours a day. But still, I'm in there and I'm doing it 6 hours a day every day. So if you're not putting in enough effort to where you feel like it's a full-time job, then you need to work yourself up to that, because eventually this is what your full-time job will be. You will be writing software. And if that's your job, you'll be doing it for 6 to 8 hours every day. Quite honestly, there's days where I'm doing it for 10 hours. A little in the morning, a little during the work day, and then maybe in the evening a little bit if I need to. So if coding is a hassle to you, you need to kind of work up so that it doesn't feel like a hassle, that it's exciting, it's something that you're passionate about, because that's going to be your job. So so that's your final. So make sure again that you're looking for a concept, you're looking for something that you can build that really kind of ignites you, and you're willing to apply what we're learning in this class to building this project. So withdrawal deadline is not November 1st. I will get the correct withdrawal date for this class. The grading, and that kind of got cut off there, but basically the grading is the standard university grading. We'll be breaking this out into overall the grades will be, the final project will be 40%. These labs or assignments will be another 40%. The midterm or quiz, I'm kind of classifying it, will be about 15% of the final grade, and participation is 5%. This is actually done points based, not percentages. The percentages are estimates on the number of points being distributed across for the whole course. And then the grade will be standard grading scale that's used by the university. Alright, so the last thing is the course schedule. So again, this is kind of just to give you a perspective of where we're going over the next 16 weeks. So these are the concepts or the topics that we'll be covering. These are the chapters that are associated with those concepts, and then how we'll be going through. If I feel that there's a lot of struggle or difficulty that students are having with a particular concept, I may extend it into a second week, or I may end up shuffling things around just to provide better continuity to what we're trying to accomplish. And then the final thing is course evaluation, something that the department has really wanted to have a lot of focus on is course evals. These are the evaluations that you as the students are doing against the department, against the course, and against the professor, being able to evaluate our performance. What are you getting enough out of the course? Are there things you would like to see differently? Were there struggles that you were having with the course, with the way it was taught? All of these things. So these are things that I want you to keep in mind. And obviously, if there's anything that's terribly troubling or difficult, come to me as soon as possible. Let's try to work through them the best we can. I don't want you to feel like we're disconnected in some way, even though we are. And then this is an asynchronous course. I want you to feel comfortable enough to come to me and ask questions. Don't feel like any question is too small. We can set up Skype sessions or anything else to try to engage face-to-face and do screen shares and try to go work through what we're trying to accomplish. And I want to just make sure that I'm making myself as available as possible, and ideally getting a good course evaluation through that. So if there are things, don't wait until week 16 or week 13 when we're trying to collect these evaluations to say, this isn't working, something was wrong, the professor, I could never see the lecture, blah, 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 blah. Tell me week 2, hey, I couldn't get to the lecture, those types of things. So don't feel like I'm not accessible. I want to be as accessible as possible, and I hope you recognize that. All right, so that is the syllabus in a nutshell. So that's kind of the basic ideas of what we're going to be covering in this course for the rest of the term. So I want to kind of shift gears and talk about the HTTP process. And I want to do this as kind of a prereq to getting into the course content itself. The reason I want to cover this, and I'm only going to maybe spend about 10 minutes, is I want to at least make sure that you have a good understanding of how does the HTTP process work. If you took the first web development course, you probably went through and you were creating HTML pages with images and style sheets and JavaScript, and doing all of that, you may have touched briefly on the basic HTTP request response process. The idea is that I have a client, a computer, or a tablet, or a laptop, or a phone that's running a web browser, and that browser makes a request to the server and says, hey, I need your home page. And that page is served off of the disk, off the hard drive, and passed back or sent to the client from the server. And then the browser has the responsibility of parsing that HTML and actually rendering the page. The process that we're going to be going through as we build our ASP.NET MVC applications is similar, but there's another layer of complexity that kind of gets tacked onto that. So this is what you would see as the request response model for IIS-7 using ASP.NET. So if we start at the bottom, you'll notice that there's the client, the computer, there's the cloud or the internet. So our request goes across the internet. It hits the HTTP protocol stack, which is basically the front door to that web server. The web server, IIS or Internet Information Services, picks up that request and goes through a series of steps where it evaluates the request and then directs it to the appropriate application pool. That application pool is where our ASP.NET MVC application runs. And inside of there's a series of handlers that pick up our request and then route it to the appropriate place. And then when that routing occurs, it's then handing off that request to what we're going to refer to as controllers and actions. The action will actually pick up the request, do whatever work it needs to do. Maybe it's connecting to a database to pull some data, but ultimately it's then going to render out a view. That view is the HTML possibly merged with some database data that's then sent back to the client, looking at step 7, and then that data is then passed back to the client computer, step 8, from across the internet. So this process seems very complex if you look at this diagram, but it's somewhat more simplistic than that. This is that idea I was talking about a moment ago. So on the far left, you have a browser. It makes a request to IIS, which is that web server on that. The next step is the actual route. So it says I'm looking for the home page. So the route calls to the home page controller. The home page controller goes out and grabs some data from the models and then passes them to the view. And the view is what you and I would think of as basically the HTML layout for the page. That view is picked up and it's passed back by that controller through the web server back to the browser. And the browser then picks up that HTML and renders it out, just like it would have done with a basic HTML document. But it's slightly more sophisticated because these regions of green, yellow, and orange on the screen are where we actually are writing our code. And that code, be it a class or a method or HTML, is where we're actually kind of doing the magic. We're putting that logic in place that makes it a dynamic page request instead of being static. And that's essentially that right-hand side of this model is what we're going to be focusing this entire term on. We're going to be talking about this idea of models, views, and controllers, which is where the acronym MVC comes from. This is the ASP.NET stack. So ASP.NET is a component or a section of the .NET framework. It lives underneath the system.web namespace. And ASP.NET started out in 2001 when the .NET framework began, and it was simply there primarily for websites, and those websites were being constructed or created using what's called web forms, which is the third orange box from the left at the very top row. As the web has evolved, as web technologies have evolved, things such as JavaScript, if you've ever heard of things called jQuery, you have asynchronous programming, AJAX perhaps, if you've heard that term before, HTML5, all of these different technologies, they kind of have grown and built and lived on top of one another to the point where now we have this entire rich, robust stack that is the ASP.NET stack. And inside of it we have particular modules for websites as well as web services, and then on top of that we have things like MVC, web pages, web forms, single pages, and then services of Web API and SignalR. We will not be covering all of this. We are going to be focusing primarily on the MVC sites component and the web APIs. But these are all part of the environment of ASP.NET. These technologies, especially as of 2013, used to work in isolation, but they're now one cohesive unit. You can mix and match these technologies within applications. You don't have to pick one technology and then be kind of like pigeonholed into using that technology for the rest of your application. If you find that one technology suits you better than another one, you have the flexibility to mix and match these technologies. But for this course in particular, we'll be focusing on ASP.NET MVC, and then in the last final weeks of the course, we'll be covering the Web API component. Alright, so that's kind of the brief overview of everything in terms of the HTTP process. So what we're going to be doing again is we'll be building those applications that run on the backside of this request model. Alright, so let's build our first MVC application. First thing I do want to note is that you will need to download and install, if you currently don't have it, Visual Studio 2012, or Visual Studio 2013. If you don't currently have Visual Studio 2012 or 2013 installed, you can install it by going to the IT department webpage and by navigating to Students. Under Technology, you'll want to choose Software Downloads. From Software Downloads, choose Microsoft Software. And then from this MSDN Academic Alliance page, you'll want to, at the very bottom here, click on the MSDN AA website. This link will take you out to what's called DreamSpark, where you're able to download, honestly, just about anything that Microsoft has made. There are servers out here: SQL Server, Windows Server, BizTalk, Visual Studios, different versions of the .NET framework. You can download Windows 8, Windows 7, 8.1, Windows XP. As a UC student, you have access to all of these resources for free. If you don't have a DreamSpark login, or you're not sure what that is, this page here previously, before we went into the MSDN AA website, has directions on if you've forgotten your email address to use to log in, or you don't have the correct password. If you contact Brian, and here's a link for his email address, Brian Varkamp, he'll be able to help you get into the site and get everything taken care of. When I actually started here, I did not have access to DreamSpark, and I contacted Brian, and within a day or two, he was able to get back to me with my username and password. So, DreamSpark, very good thing. If you haven't checked it out previously, I recommend checking it out. But that's where you'd go to get Visual Studio. Alright, so if you're following along, what I recommend doing is we'll go New Project. And by choosing New Project, you'll get this New Project dialog box. Hopefully this is pretty familiar to you. If you took contemporary programming and you built any C# applications, this box should not be something new. Previously, though, what you probably did is you'd go underneath C#, you'd go Windows, and then you'd either choose a Windows form application or a console application, possibly a class library. But you probably spend a lot of time in console apps and Windows form apps. For this term, we're going to actually spend all of our time underneath Web. Now, we opened up Web and you go, oh, there's only one option: ASP.NET Web Application. My response is, that is correct. The reason for that is that, as I said before, as of 2013, ASP.NET has been brought under this single unified ecosystem for web development. Everything works together, everything is unified. If you're running on Visual Studio 2012, however, you probably see something that looks more like this, where you have an ASP.NET Empty Web App project, Web Forms application, ASP.NET MVC4, MVC3 web application, these dynamic entity web apps, and then you have some additional options. If you're running Visual Studio 2012, you're going to want to choose the MVC4 web application. If you're running Visual Studio 2013, just choose the web app. We'll give our project a name. We'll call this 14SS Week 1 MVC. Okay. Now, if you're running Visual Studio 2013, you'll be presented with a secondary box. This box helps us navigate or choose the type of project template we want to use. We can choose different project templates depending on what we're trying to accomplish. An empty one basically says, give me a blank slate, I'm going to build it from the ground up. Web Forms says, I'm going to use the Web Forms technology that was originally released back in 2001. MVC says, give me MVC technology. Web API says, I'm going to use Web API technology. Single page applications are very much similar to just HTML5 driven apps that have a lot of web services behind them. And there's actually a custom Facebook project template if you're wanting to build a Facebook application. Microsoft team kind of threw that in. So what we're going to choose right now is we're going to do the MVC application. Again, if you're running 2012, you probably don't get this dialog. It probably just takes you into that project. 2013, we're kind of choosing where we want to go. You'll notice though, if I choose MVC, I still can check manually web forms or web APIs. So again, that flexibility is there. The authentication option here on the right hand side says change authentication. I'm going to click that and I'm going to set it to no authentication right now. We'll talk about authentication in the coming weeks, but for this week I'm not going to focus on that at all really. I just wanted to stick with a standard basic application. So we'll let Visual Studio scaffold up a project for us, and it'll go out and kind of do its grunt work, and then we'll get presented with this, your ASP.NET application. Congratulations, fanfare, now what? So what Visual Studio has done for us is it has scaffolded or pre-built what we would need to build a basic MVC application. And then it provides us with this little tutorial page. This page is here just as a help or a guide. I would recommend in some free time go through some of these tutorials here. We're going to cover a majority of this, but this is direct from Microsoft. So getting their perspective on what they call things and how things work is definitely always worthwhile if you're going to be using a lot of Microsoft technologies. Some of the highlights that I recommend is this area of adding more libraries using NuGet. We'll be using NuGet in probably weeks 2 or 3, and we'll be talking about pulling in projects and pulling in additional libraries into our project and being able to use those components. And NuGet's a really nice feature that was added back in 2012 as an add-on, and then it's incorporated directly in 2013. It allows you to basically pull projects that are published out on the web into your application. Alright, so hopefully you're familiar with Visual Studio. Again, just kind of the highlights. So down the left hand side, you'll probably have a toolbox, which is empty, a server explorer, which will allow you to browse the databases that you have as part of your project. If you don't have a Server Explorer for any reason, you can go under the View menu and you'll see things like the Server Explorer, the Solution Explorer, the Toolbox, which is down here a little bit, and pretty much all of the windows that you have are either on this list under View, or under Toolbars below, or other windows. Alright, so under our Solution Explorer, you'll notice a few basic things. You'll notice there's a whole bunch of folders and a handful of files. The folders will have things like app data, app start, content, controllers, fonts, models, scripts, and views. And then we have a favicon, a global.asax, packages underscore config. There's the project readme, which is that page that we saw when we first opened up the project. This is the actual source code for that page. And the web config. When you were doing your Windows applications or your console applications, you probably dealt with the app.config for storing things like connection strings. The web.config is the equivalent of that for websites. Under controllers, you'll see there's one controller. It's really a class file called home controller. This home controller inherits a controller. It has 1, 2, 3 methods: index, about, and contact. Models is empty, and views has 2 folders, one called home, one called shared. We have a view start and another web config. I want you to kind of draw some parallels right now. We have a controller called home controller, and then under views we have a folder called home. You'll notice under the views home folder that we have 3 CS.html files: an about file, a contact file, and an index file. Looking at the home controller's method, you'll also notice that we have an about method, a contact method, and an index method. These methods or actions. A controller, it consists of methods. Each method is called an action. These actions map directly to one of these CS/HTML files or views, and this relationship is intentional. And it's not intentional in that it is hard-coded, but it's intentional by convention. So the idea here is that for every method or action you will have at least one view file that maps directly to that action. Now, how does this mapping occur? When requests come in to ASP.NET, the routes look at the URL and they map from the URL to the correct controller, to the correct action, and then pass the request to that action. The action's responsibility is to do whatever code that it needs to do or run, and then return the view that's associated with the action. So when the index action is called, its responsibility is to return the index view. Now this is the HTML with a little bit of what's called Razor markup, and this is essentially what is rendered out and sent back to the client as a web page. That is the responsibility of the controller and or action, is to take that request, execute whatever code is necessary, and ultimately render out a view as HTML. So let's take a minute and kind of walk through what that actually looks like. Depending on the browsers you have installed, within Visual Studio you have a play button, and for me, my default browser for Visual Studio is Google Chrome. If you have Internet Explorer, it probably will default to Internet Explorer, but you can hit this drop down and then check which browser should be your default. So you can choose Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome, any browser that you have installed. It should pick it up and let you select them as an option. So I'll hit play. Play will then launch Chrome, navigate to what's called IIS Express, which installs with Visual Studio 2013 and 2012. IIS Express is a micro web server that runs on your machine during development and debug. So what it does is it navigates to localhost, which is your local machine, colon, and then some random port number. That number is just randomly selected. It's an available port on your machine, and it's there just to serve up your local development website. Ultimately, this website would get moved from your local machine out to a web server, but to kind of work a full development environment, IIS Express runs on your machine to serve up web pages so that you don't have to install the full IIS or Internet Information Services service on your computer or run a full web server with IIS installed. Alright, so we're now on the home page. You'll notice a few things. So our URL just simply says it's http:// but Chrome kind of drops that localhost 3899 in my case. We have 3 pages on here. We have a home page, an about page, and a contact page. If I click about, the URL changes to localhost 3899/home/about. Home refers to the home controller. About refers to the action about. So our route is parsed using these 2 elements. This says from the home controller, called the about method. Likewise, if we want to interact with the contact method, we would navigate to home/contact. This will give us our basic contact page information. This information, this text, is coming from the view folder, home, and then it is pulling the contact.cshtml page. And this HTML is what is ultimately being rendered here. Now there's additional things on this page that you're not seeing inside of our view, and we'll talk about that in coming weeks as to where all that other HTML is coming from or going, and then what some of this markup means. Just as a 30,000 foot view kind of perspective, the @ sign here is the delimiter for Razor markup, and again we'll talk about Razor I believe next week, but that is going to be the convention or notation that you'll use when you're basically writing C# into these view pages. Okay. When you stop debugging, by default your web server, your IIS Express instance, also stops running. So IIS Express launches when you start debug, and when you stop debug, it gets terminated. So your page doesn't really persist beyond that debug. So it's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind. There are other ways around that, and I'll touch on those in the future, but for right now, those are things you just need to keep in mind. Okay, so really that's all I wanted to cover for this week in terms of lecture, was what to expect in building your first app. We didn't really get into writing any code, but that is how you at least get into Visual Studio, start up a project, launch that project, and then just get some basic ideas around the mechanics of how MVC works. Going into next week, we will cover things in a lot more detail and figure out, things that we need to do, things that we need to work on. What does it mean to use Razor? What are these mechanics of MVC, and why is it such a big deal? And all of those details we'll start to unpack next week. So for this week, again, thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available and always interested in helping out, even if it's something around the syllabus or something that I presented this week that you're not totally certain about. Please email me, please contact me. I'm more than welcome to help you out with this. Everybody have a great week. Think about those project ideas for your final. I'll be posting a small document up as an assignment for this week where I want you to kind of reflect on that and then just submit back to me kind of what you're thinking about doing, and making sure that you're trying to hit all the goal points outlined in that little worksheet. What are the things that you want to do in your application to make sure that you're hitting these points, that you're hitting these objectives, and we'll kind of work through that over the first couple of weeks as you start to flesh out what that idea looks like. All right, have a great week, everybody. Thank you very much.